And thank you, Baba, for warm hearts.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, seriously.
Thanks to all of you for taking an interest, and I know that some of this, we've really been covering a lot of material, and some of it is quite difficult, so my hat, if I had a hat, it would be off to you for bearing, persisting through all of this. As you can see, there's really a lot here. There's a lot to study here, and I do think we're going to have 700 years to study it. I mean, these topics are going to be endlessly explored over the future generations, and this is just the beginning. They're going to be, the greats are going to show up, and we'll delve into this. And when you look at the past avataric advents, the avatar gives the fundamental revelation, but in the centuries that follow, with all that happens with the fighting and religion and all of that, there also does come to pass great giants who helped to explore and bring out what was implicit in the beginning, like the Prophet Muhammad, brought the Quran. But when you read someone like Ibn Arabi or Rumi or Hafiz, a lot of the inner splendors are brought into view by the avatar actually unfolds more and more and more as time goes on. So I think that this will happen with Meherabode too. So some of the things we've been looking at will be explored in much greater depth, and some of the splendors of what Baba brought will be brought into view more fully. To mention what we're doing this afternoon, we'll finish this part up at 3:30, and after a short break, Elaine and I are going to sing some songs, and we're going to project the words to it, and some of you are invited to croon along, should you so choose to do so, or just follow the words if you'd like to do that. So it'll be for about 45 minutes of singing, and then the whole thing will wrap up at 3:30. So this is the last of our 4 sessions, and this one is on the path to God. Here's our topics. The path to God. We'll start with the 3 great margs, or paths, and I wrote them out here. My handwriting is a little messy, but Gyan, that's J-N, Gyan, you say Gyan, Gyan. Gyan marg, that's the path of knowledge. Karma marg, or the path of action. And Bhakti marg, or the path of devotion. This is a traditional schema within the Hindu world. Perhaps the master treatise on this topic is the Bhagavad Gita, although there are many other things on it. And Baba seems to have accepted this conceptualization of the great paths. And we'll say more about that, of course, as time goes on, of the great paths to God. Then the involutionary journey, the planes and the asmans. Baba gave a description of the inner worlds, of the subtle and the mental, up to God state, 7 planes of consciousness. And those are divisible in terms of the 3 spheres that we were looking at earlier. Beyond the gross, there's the subtle sphere with the first 4 planes, the mental sphere with the next 2, and then the 7th plane of God is in the real sphere, which is beyond the illusory domain altogether. So we'll look at some of that. Some of this will be familiar. We'll also, there's been new revelations in Creation and Its Causes, where Baba described to the Mir Ashram boys another dimension to the inner landscape. Those are the asmans, or the skies. It turns out that the plains have these asmans or skies as adjuncts. So Baba explained that to the Mir Ashram boys. We had, the LA group had one of them a few years ago, Sendir Vasali, who was actually there at the time and heard those lectures. And like a dunce, I missed the opportunity to ask him some questions about it, even though I had this manuscript at the time. But I was working on other things, and what a fool. Anyway, there are some real good questions. He was probably in such a state of rapturous love that he wouldn't have remembered anyway. But okay, and then the preeminence of love as a very signature theme of Baba's. Baba always emphasized that love is most important. In fact, in his talks to these Meher Ashram boys that are in this book, Baba is giving all this amazing information about the asmans and what's to be found there. It's astonishing information, and it's unbelievably deep and profound that he was giving to this bunch of teens and preteen boys. But consistently, at the end of lectures, he says, okay, forget all of what I've just been talking about and do one thing: create love, create prem. That's what matters. So, and this book is most astonishing in that it gives all kinds of new, amazing metaphysical information about the inner planes. And the response that these boys had was that they went love mad. You know, this is part of the history of the Meher Ashram, Prem Ashram. They were weeping uncontrollably for days together, and a number of them were precipitated into the experience of the planes. So who knows, maybe that will happen with the LA group. It'd be fun to see. You could turn the cameras around as everyone weeps uncontrollably as they use it to blackmail them later. And then the role of the master. That too, Baba has, I won't actually be saying very much about it, these things, but I just want to emphasize these themes for Baba were the ones that he really hammered home with his lovers. Create love, and you have to have a master. Or without a master, the path is far, far more difficult, and it's very risky. A God-realized master, perfect master of the avatar. So those are our topics. So I want to go back to this table which I were using before. Let's see. Because the three paths, it turns out, are directly related to the triune nature of God. They call it marg, like gyan means knowledge, and marg means path. Sometimes it's called an karma marg, bhakti marg. Sometimes it will say bhakti yoga. That word gets used also, yoga, which is a discipline or a path. And these three are actually, there's a fourth that is often put in there, Raj Yoga. And Baba sometimes talked about that also, Raj Yoga. But these are standard in the Hindu world. As I say, the Bhagavad Gita really is a master exposition on this. Baba praised the Bhagavad Gita most highly. I read a statement, I don't think it's been published, but where Baba was talking about how splendid it is, and he said, it's not just for India, but it's for the whole world. So it's really, for those interested, it is most worth reading. It's quite wonderful, actually. It's really, it would be hard to surpass as a treatment of these three yogas. But Baba did give the metaphysical foundation to these three paths, which hasn't been given before that I've ever seen. I don't see how it could have been. That is to say, the Gyan, Karma, and Bhakti margs have as their foundation the triune nature of God, right? The path of knowledge, Gyan Marg, is rooted on God's nature as knowledge, right? I mean, that makes sense. Karma Marg, the path of action, is based on God's nature as power. And Bhakti Marg, the path of devotion, Bhakti means devotion, is based on God's nature as bliss. So let's root on this a little bit. This is, again, this metaphysical foundation is something which the avatar of the age has given, which wasn't understood before. Again, because knowledge, power, bliss is something which Baba kind of revealed, you might say. This came out in the course of doing the research for the Tiffin Lectures. You know the book, the Tiffin Lectures? I'll show it again, but this was published in 2017. And this is a collection of talks that Baba gave to his Mandalay in 1926 and 1927. And for the people interested, I would say they're quite accessible. They're not extremely difficult at all. They're very appealing, I would say. It's not a organized sequence like God Speaks or anything. They're just on whatever topic Baba wanted to talk about on that day, on whatever the day was. It was at Meherabad, often Lower Meherabad, in a particular place there. But in the course of doing research, Meherwan and I had been working with a manuscript that was turned out to be very defective. It was a typed manuscript of the Tiffin Lectures, but it had all these gaps that weren't filled in, often with words that weren't filled in. I have the original of this that doesn't have a diagram. It's just big blank space there. But then I was preparing for a program at Meherabad, and I wanted to see some old Meher messages which Chris Pearson had. So we were digging through, and suddenly I saw a manuscript, and lo and behold, it was that manuscript, the Tiffin Lectures manuscript, with all the gaps filled in. There were times that they typed in triplicate, right? But they wouldn't mark up the first copy, which is what we had at the Trust, but they did mark up one of the carbon copies. And it had all this stuff filled in, and it was like, it turned out to be the major source that we wound up using for this book. I'm just showing you this because this is one of the diagrams that got filled in, and it directly relates to this topic. Here's the redrawn version of it, which is a bit easier to read. Let's see. So, up here, this means God, the eternal, or Anant. Anant means without limit, infinite. This is the goal of all paths, right? And here you see God is knowledge, or Gyan, God is bliss, or Anand, and God is power, or Shakti. That's actually the term for power. And these, I know it's a bit blurry, but these are the three paths. the Gyan Marg, the Bhakti Marg, and the Karma Marg. And each is rooted on one of the natures of God, the triune nature of God. So in the Gyan Marg, we're going to be looking more at what these are. Are you guys familiar with these three paths at all? Any of you? Maybe a little bit, some of you. But the Gyan Marg, it's like, in a nutshell, you could characterize it as meditation would be the archetypal activity, where you remove yourself and you concentrate the mind and exclude everything except the object of your meditation. Taken to the ultimate degree, you would have somebody like Saint Anthony in the desert, who went out in the desert for 40 years, or Milarepa, who went up into his cave in the Himalayas, or that kind of thing. People who really remove themselves entirely and just focus on meditation. So it's the path of knowledge in that sense. I'll go to Karma Marg, path of action, right? It is based on God's nature as power. So to sort of help to make this intuitively make sense, why would the path of action be based on power? Well, to act, you have to exercise power, right? That's precisely what action is. Like, I want to lift up my coffee cup. Well, I have to exercise such power as is needed to lift up my coffee cup. I'm Napoleon and I want to conquer Europe. Well, I have to exercise power to conquer Europe. All action is the use of power, the exercise of power. But the characteristic of a spiritual path, a marg, a yoga, is that you're not doing it for selfish purposes. You're doing it as a sacrifice in order to find God, right? So in karma yoga, it's the path of, Baba's English phrase for this was selfless service. So you're acting, but not selfishly. You're renouncing the fruit of action and acting for the benefit of others in the service of God. Thus it's a yoga. So that's why karma yoga is the exercise of power. That is to say, action is the exercise of power in a selfless way. That's why it's a yoga. So that's one of the great paths. And the third is bhakti yoga. And that's, again, what is the relationship between devotion and bliss? So let me just make this comment. I think that love really does have a relationship to bliss. Because, like when you're, okay, let's go back to when you're 16. For some of us, that's way, way back. For a couple of you, maybe not so far back. But when you're 16, she's so wonderful, I love her. And you just feel so blissful. Or you kiss, and it's the most blissful experience of, she doesn't love me. It's agony and ecstasy. Love is close to that, actually, to agony and ecstasy. I think by nature it is. But what makes bhakti yoga a yoga is that you're not focused on your happiness, you're focused on the happiness of the beloved, right? It's a sacrifice. All of these paths are sacrifices. You renounce the selfish aim and do it for God instead. So you're focusing, like Mera would be the ultimate degree of this, where she would be completely focused on Baba's happiness, what would please him. So for the beloved, if you're really in love with a beloved and you're doing service, you're all the time attending to what would please the beloved, and you don't think at all about what would please bring about your own happiness. So you see the connection between bhakti and bliss, right? It is connected with bliss, but because it's a yoga, it's not my bliss, it's the beloved's bliss. All three paths are like this. They are based on renunciation. Let me go to like knowledge, okay? Selfish use of knowledge is, I'm working for some government, and I pry out secret information about what an enemy government is doing. It's knowledge, right? And I pass it on to my government, and they praise me to the skies, give me a promotion, I rise in the ranks and get more money. That would be an example of the selfish use of knowledge. But knowledge yoga is not like that. It is the repudiation of all false knowledge and the affirmation of truth, which is God. You know, have you heard the phrase neti neti? That's a standard phrase in yoga and Indian meditational practice. And neti neti means not this, not this. You're constantly in your meditational state. Whatever thought or idea or image arises, if it is not the one that you are focused on, let's suppose I'm focusing on the ocean of God, God impersonal. Well, suddenly in my mind arises the image of an ice cream cone, right? Well, that's not the same thing as the ocean of God impersonal, right? So I annihilate that thought, I repudiate it, I turn away from it and dissociate, neti neti, right? Or else I have the thought of, I'm going to really be admired for this meditation and I'm going to become a hotshot. The king is going to accept me as a counselor and I'll get great quarters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's obviously not knowledge of God impersonal either. So that thought, so the practice of Gyan Yoga is the constant rejection and repudiation of false thoughts and the affirmation of the true object of meditation only. So you see, that too is a renunciation, right? It's a sacrifice of all that is false for the sake of all that is true. So all three of these paths are directly related to the triune nature of God, and all three are founded on renunciation, in that I renounce all selfish motivation and affirm God only in that aspect. Yeah. Did you want to?
So how so there are three paths, and
Yeah.
is there a choice people have? Is it based on the samskaras? Is it one better than the other? They will cover that.
Yeah, let's get to that. And I also want to get to how this relates to our Baba community, which I think is an interesting question. Yeah. But yeah, so now in this, did you want to say something?
No.
Like your hand might be. You're just meditating. You're engaged in Gyan Yoga. Okay. So this is actually the crucial discourse where Baba made this connection. I wouldn't have been able to make it, but it just turned up here a couple of years ago. And here's where Baba explains it. No, this is Tiffin Lectures. This was in February 1920. And as I say, we found the key diagram at the Pearsons, you know. It's just a fluke. Although this is explained here. Here is this explanation in the text. Okay, so now Baba starts talking about these three yogas in their relationship to the triune nature of God. I know we've had this, but I just want to say, here we have it in 1927, Baba is talking about knowledge, power, bliss. And we have it again in God Speaks, of extended treatment of knowledge, power, and bliss. And I showed a slide from the Everything and the Nothing, published in 1963. This was a major theme in Meherabad's Darshana from first to last. And look how powerful this idea is, okay, I just want to accentuate this point again, even though we talked about it, but it's so important. Knowledge, power, bliss is the basis for the mental, subtle, and gross spheres, for the mental, subtle, and gross bodies, and for the three great paths of Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. This is a very powerful coherency in Meherabad's Darshana. It really is quite, you see how much it brings together and makes sensible. So, so here Baba starts to talk about the three margs. He who adopts the bhakti marg, or path of devotion, and enters into the astral plane. And in those days, Baba used the word astral to mean subtle. Later on, he used astral to refer to something else, the sheath between the subtle and the mental. But at this time, he just meant subtle. Is rewarded by occasional glimpses of that eternal joy through whose rays he passes. You're passing through brilliant, showering rays of bliss when you're on the bhakti marg. I mean, these experiences are real, apparently. I mean, it's not just poetic imagery. You really do experience this. Nonetheless, the final goal remains a long way off. The seeker has yet to cross this astral plane before reaching the mental. And once the mental plane is attained, though he enjoys joy directly, he is not yet one with it. More often than not, the seeker remains in that blissful state for a long time. He enjoys the bliss, anand, aspect of the highest, but he has not yet become one with bliss or anand himself. He remains a mere bhakta in bhakti. Bhakti, by the way, means devotion, and bhakta means a devotee. It's the standard term for that. So this is referring back to this diagram here, the central one. Bhakti marg glimpses the path of joy and its enjoyment by musts and bhaktas. So I think a lot of the musts were experiencing this. They were drunk on bliss. They were bliss junkies. Now, here we have, okay. He who advances by the karma marg, karma means action. It also means the bondage of action, this resulting from the sanskaras you acquire from acting. But its primary meaning is actually our action, karma. Karma marg proceeds along the same basic lines as delineated above, with one difference. On the astral plane, means on the subtle plane, he gleans occasional glimpses of the eternal power, or shakti, of the highest state, not eternal bliss. So you're not getting glimpses of the bliss aspect, you're getting glimpses of the power aspect, as in the case of the bhakta. The people of this plane generally comprise the great leaders of nations to which they have rendered great service through their karma yoga. When these same karma yogis reach the mental plane, they become mahatmas, who achieve great wonders through the powers they have acquired on the planes. So it makes me think of someone like Mahatma Gandhi. He was doubtless had been a great karma yogi in the past, and that even in that lifetime, and that qualified him to become a great leader and the founder of the nation of India. Actually, even though it's not particularly appealing thought, it does seem that all the great leaders of great nations do have this in their background.
Does Modi have to?
I'm not going to mention any names, but I think all the leaders of nations do. I mean, they seem like colossal asses, most of them. But my understanding, Arnavas used to talk about that. My understanding is that they earned it. And they have their role because God has put them there, even though they, exhibit no spiritual awareness at all. But in truth, they have the punya acquired probably by karma yoga. It's kind of good to be aware of that, because when we look at our world leaders, and so many of them seem so terrible, but I think it's good to remember that actually, whether we like it or not, they did earn it, and God is using them. That's not to say that they're good. Many of them so obviously are not. So this is talking about that. Lastly, he who pursues the Gyan marg. Gyan, of course, means knowledge. Sometimes it's spelled D-N-Y-A-N. D-N-Y-A-N. If you see that, it's the same word. The reason is that the Indic, Hindi, Gujarati consonant doesn't correspond to anything we say in English very well. It's nya, nya, gyan, So sometimes it's spelled G-N-Y-A-N, sometimes it's spelled D-N-Y-A-N. But the standard transliteration nowadays is this one, J and then N with a tilde over it. That's what this little squiggle is. And the A means it's a long A. Ya, not gyan, but gyan. Lastly, he who pursues the Gyan marg passes through the same stages as though in the bhakti karma margs do, except that he experiences the knowledge aspects of eternal existence. When these Gyan yogis, as they are called, sometimes they're called Gyanis with an I. If you see that, it means a Gyan yogi. Reach the astral plane, means the subtle plane. They win glimpses of eternal knowledge, and as they advance further into the mental plane, through their Gyan, or knowledge acquired in the planes, they see the threefold form, Trivid Svarup, of God. And I wish I knew exactly what that is. Maybe it's knowledge, power, bliss. I don't know. I've never seen that phrase before. If anybody else encounters it, I'd be curious to know. Trivid, actually Sridhar helped me translate this. That is, they experience sakshatkar, God's immediate sight and presence. This is a word that Baba used a lot. Sakshatkar is the immediate vision and experience of God, like on the sixth plane. Earlier, while in the astral plane, they had, that subtle means, they heard sweet melodies, smelled subtle fragrances, and saw beautiful sights, invisible to the ordinary senses. So here's his description of these three paths in their relation to the triune nature of God. All right, do you see the connection, you guys? Yeah.
If someone loves something or someone, or there's no difference in the nature, beautiful in the nature or someone, without selfishness and ownership, what is that? Which one is that?
Well, that would be bhakti, a higher aspect of bhakti. Yeah.
You feel the blaze, yeah?
What's that?
You feel the blaze, yes?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Baba gave examples. You've heard the story of Majnun and Layla in Iran.
Yes, something like that.
I mean, he was just in love with this woman. God didn't come into the picture so far as he was concerned. But Baba said, the story is that a master, a God-realized master, encountered him at the end of the story and said, well, you know, if you loved God the way you loved Leela, you would get God. And Majnun said, I don't care about God, I only care about Layla. But his love was so pure and so true that he got God realization.
Without ownership.
Yeah. He was God realized, he became...
And when is that guy, like imagine doing action, it is which
karma yoga, yeah.
karma. When doing action is karma.
Well, let's go into all of that, Baba. We're just at the start here, of how all this plays itself out. Here are some of Baba's comments. Let me see about what these yogas imply and what they are. Let's see. I'll get there in a second. I'm scrolling through. Okay. Okay, this is from Listen Humanity. And this is a treatment of these yogas. It's a little bit small, but I'll read it out. The various routes. You Listen Humanity, do you know that book?
Yes.
It's it's edited by Don Stevens, and it has a bunch of discourses of Baba's in it. I think it was published in 1957. The various routes by which the individual may start in the journey are many indeed. Several of the principal ones are often referred to as Dhyana Marga. You see there it's spelled with a D, same word. The way of knowledge, Karma Marga, or the way of action, Bhakti Marga, or the way of devotion. And here he talks about Yoga Marga, there's the fourth one. So I'm just not going to worry about that here. It's too complicated to try to treat that topic. And let's see. I have this in a more readable form somewhere. Darn it. Okay. Oops. Sorry, I'm having a moment. There we go. Okay, so here, this is his account of Gyan Marg. Gyan Marg, or the way of knowledge, may consist, and first he's going to give the superficial version of it, may consist in the pursuit of speculative philosophy, either through independent thinking or in the study of existing systems of philosophic thought. Okay, that's Gyanmarg in its surface aspect. Or it may be transformed through concentrating the mind and the entire personality on the truths hitherto mentally grasped, right? The first is just intellectually understanding an idea, but this is, the real thing is where you really assimilate and meditate on and make them part of you. Such deep meditation of spiritual realities is aimed at assimilating their inner meaning and results in lifting them out of the category of intellectual playthings into animating principles which invade and gradually transmute the innermost core of the aspirant. So that would be real Gyanmarg.
He's written it so hard. I mean, for me, I was really trying to grasp as you were reading it, but even it's better in infinite intelligence, you know? Anyway,
The path
that's
to
my
God
bad opinion.
The path to God is hard. There's no doubt about
It's
it.
not only here. It's the rest of it.
What we want is
Sorry about
a spiritual path for dummies who don't want to have to make much
exactly.
effort.
Dummies like me. Right, that you got it.
Easy. There was in Mariposa, who was it? One of the Baba lovers bought in one of these retirement community areas, bought a home on Easy Street. That was actually the name of it. So we could ask for the spiritual path for residents of Easy Street. You know, I don't think with Baba we're going to get that. Okay, now this is on Karma Marg. Karma Marg, or the way of action, may normally consist of a life of service to humanity, a life in which effort is expended to improve the well-being of people through social, political, or physical projects. So like social service, he's talking about that kind of thing. In such service, the motivating factor is usually a sense of duty, but often it is corrupted by the desire to achieve power, fame, or other personal gain. Right? We see plenty of this in the world today. Regardless, the way of action creates in its wake many joys and sorrows, much exaltation and much disillusionment. It often creates further bindings for the soul and is frequently fraught with nagging restlessness due to the worker's expectation of specific results. As often as not, it results in a enlargement of the ego rather than its deflation. Okay, this is not true karma yoga, this is the superficial practice of those kinds of activities. On the other hand, internalizing this same way of action renders it pure, safe, and spontaneous. In such case, the aspirant may still be engaged in humanitarian work, but that work is no longer entangled in personal ambition. Such service is not a mechanical response to a sense of duty, but a spontaneous expression of voluntary love. Through it, man gradually becomes purer, is freed from many limitations, and finds peace of being as he becomes wholly detached from the results of his actions. Under the enlightening influence of inner understanding, the life of action helps in the elimination of the ego mind and quickens the pace to the attainment of truth consciousness. So Baba has explained what the surface, superficial version of it looks like. Helping other people, charitable work. It's good work. You get good karma for it. It's not karma yoga, though. Karma yoga is where you detach yourself from the results of your action. You serve others without any desire for gain, and you detach yourself from whether you are successful or not. That's the essence of karma yoga. We're going to say more about that. And the bhakti yoga, actually, this is a good statement. You might think that bhakti yoga is love, the path of love. And in its higher aspects, it becomes that. In Discourses, Baba called this para bhakti. But in its superficial version, the rites, rituals, and ceremonies of the world are bhakti yoga. Baba said this. So here is a place where he distinguishes between devotion and love. So bhakti yoga begins with devotion, but gradually as you ascend, it becomes more and more real love, which is what the height of it is. So here he talks about,
the difference.
Yeah, I did a spelling mistake, which I am going to correct.
Yay.
There we go. Okay. Love burns the lover. Devotion burns the beloved. You know love that's like that? It's like painful to get it, A lot of the love that Baba gets from us is like that. But real love doesn't burn him, it burns us. Love seeks the happiness for the beloved. Devotion seeks blessings from the beloved. Love seeks to shoulder the burden of the beloved. Devotion throws the burden on the beloved. Love gives. Devotion asks. Love is silent and sublime, devoid of outward expressions. Devotion expresses itself outwardly. Oh, Baba, how much I love you. You know, showing off your love to Baba. There was a lot of that around Baba. You know, it happened a lot. Love does not require the presence of the beloved in order to love. This is really a significant one. Devotion demands the presence of the beloved to express affection for the beloved. So this is a good description of the difference between devotion in its beginning phases and what it turns into in the end, which is real love. So all three of these we've just looked at have marked the difference between the superficial version of these paths and the real version of them. Yeah.
I have a question for the future. Does love ever reach Ishwar? You don't have to answer. Because it's for the future. It's interesting.
Yeah, will we get to Ishwar again? Ishwar is relevant to this whole chapter of infinite intelligence. So here's more on these three paths. We're doing a basic description of them here. Let's see, on Karma Marg. Okay, here, this is another thumbnail description of these three paths. I just wrote this up. This isn't from Baba or anything, but it summarizes the three paths as Baba has described them. The path of action, Karma Yoga. In this path, the aspirant learns how properly to engage and negotiate God's nature as power through a life of selfless action and selfless service. Right?
That's powerful.
Remember how we were talking about you are working with God in Karma Yoga, you are working with God's nature as power because you're acting. So, but you're learning how to do it in a selfless way instead of a selfish way. The key to this path lies in purity of motive and renunciation of the fruit of action, which is to say, detachment. Do you know renunciation of the fruit of action? Have you heard that phrase? The fruit of action is you perform an action in order to win the fruit, whatever it is. Like, I work at my job in order to get my paycheck. That's the fruit of action. Or, I do something, some wonderful good deed because I want to be praised for it and become famous because of having done this thing. Was it 3 years ago that Los Angeles won the Super Bowl? So who is their great receiver? I forget his name.
You're talking to the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
LA had a great receiver.
Yeah.
Receiver is.
I've forgotten his name. Anyway, he catches the football and runs for a touchdown, so that at the end he can get the best player of the game trophy. That's the fruit of action, right? I mean, all of us act this way, don't we? One way or another. We do things in order to receive the reward of it. Well, in Karma Yoga, the essence of it is that inwardly you renounce the fruit of action. Now, Karma Yoga, a Karma Yogi can act in a way where nobody knows that he's a Karma Yogi. Just looks like a regular person doing a job. So you could do your job and look, you get your paycheck and maybe people praise you or maybe people blame you, and to all outward appearances you're just an ordinary person with a job. That's not the essential thing. Is in your heart of hearts if you're renouncing whether you get success or not. like I work for a whole month, and then that schnook of a boss pockets the money and takes off for Florida, and I don't get anything, okay? Well, in my heart of hearts, I let go of it.
Yeah.
Now, I may have to behave outwardly in some practical way. There's nothing against that. But in my heart of hearts, it's all the same whether I got my paycheck or I don't. I'm detached. It's very hard to do this.
Yeah, it's
You know?
hard to do
It's
that.
very hard. But that's what real karma yoga is.
I remember a teacher of mine telling me one time, it really puzzled me, I just now got it, that the mundane is what we do for the sake of something else.
Yeah.
We do it all the time for the sake of something.
Yes, that's right.
But the profound or the
Yeah.
you know,
Transcendent.
the profound transcendent is what we do for its own sake.
Yeah.
For the sake of being privileged enough to do it.
Yeah. So in karma yoga, you would, the eyes of others, you're doing what you're doing for the sake of something else. But in your heart of hearts, you're not. You renounce it. You know? So karma yoga is the key. He can get the best player of the game trophy. That's the fruit of action, right? I mean, all of us act this way, you know, don't we? One way or another. We do things in order to receive the reward of it. Well, in karma yoga, the essence of it is that inwardly you renounce the fruit of action. Now, karma yoga, a karma yogi can act in a way where nobody knows that he's a karma yogi. Just looks like a regular person doing a job. So like, you could do your job and look, you get your paycheck and maybe people praise you or maybe people blame you, and to all outward appearances, you're just an ordinary person with a job. That's not, the essential thing is in your heart of hearts, if you're renouncing whether you get success or not. Like, I work for a whole month, and then that schnook of a boss pockets the money and takes off for Florida, and I don't get anything, okay? Well, in my heart of hearts, I let go of it.
Yeah.
Now, I may have to behave outwardly in some practical way. There's nothing against that. But in my heart of hearts, it's all the same whether I got my paycheck or I don't. I'm detached. It's very hard to do this.
Yeah, it's
You know?
hard to do
It's
that.
very hard. But that's what real karma yoga is.
I remember a teacher of mine telling me one time, it really puzzled me, I just now got it, that the mundane is what we do for the sake of something else.
Yeah.
We do it all the time for the sake of something.
Yes, that's right.
But the profound or the
Yeah.
you know,
Transcendent.
the profound transcendent is what we do for its own sake.
Yeah.
For the sake of being privileged enough to do it.
Yeah. So in karma yoga, you would, the eyes of others, you're doing what you're doing for the sake of something else. But in your heart of hearts, you're not. You renounce it. You know? So karma yoga is, the key of it lies in the motivation, what motivates you. That's the essence of it, which is invisible to other people. But you have to do it yourself. So in karma yoga, you're actually acting out your sanskaras, right? Everything we do is a result of our sanskaras,
That's right.
and they come up, and in karma yoga, you act them out. I mean, unless there's some horrible sin. I mean, you don't act out, you want to rape and murder someone. Well, you're not going to do that. But, you know, kind of wholesome sanskaras related to your proper role in your duty, let's say. You do your duty. you act out the sanskaras. So you're spending them. But you don't get new ones because in your heart of hearts you detach yourself from the fruit of action.
So you don't take the upabodh.
You don't take the upabodh for that reason.
That's specifically.
Yeah, that's the key to it. Yeah. Now in Jnana Yoga, okay, so we'll go to Jnana Yoga. Rooted in God's nature as knowledge, or Jnana, the path of knowledge undertakes direct frontal assault on the ego through the exercise of the discriminative faculty, as the aspirant repudiates the false and seeks to identify with the true and real. It's a very difficult path because the archetype of it is meditation. You know, a monk in a his cell meditating for 20 years together, or a yogi up in a cave who doesn't see anyone for years and years and just meditates. So the thing that happens is that you're directly taking on the mind. Thoughts are arising and you are not giving them scope. You're not countenancing them at all. So this is very hard. It's really not for most people, I would say.
Baba says that.
Yeah.
And he says there is a lot of suffering in it.
Yeah,
And
there's a
it's
lot
not-
of suffering in
it's not,
Jnana Yoga.
And he explains about those 4 refrainments, like no carnal desires, intense fasting.
Right. Baba mentions in terms of Jnana Yoga, penance, fasting, solitude. These are.
Neti also.
Yeah. You might say that in Jnana Yoga, there's a lot of prep. You know, it's like you've got to find a cave. I mean, in LA, getting a good cave probably costs $2,000 a month.
Yeah, you gotta
That's
fight,
right.
you gotta fight off the.
And even then, you probably pay taxes and all sorts of troubles getting a good cave. But you need a good cave. You've got to somehow make provision for enough food not to starve to death. You need, there's fasting, there's penance, there's preparatory work before you can actually do the real thing itself. Yeah.
A really interesting example of this is Tupasi Maharaj.
He's a very good
He literally
case.
went into a cave for about a year, and he almost starved to death, and he
Didn't
finally
even drink
survived
water.
because he was able to drink water, rainwater,
Yeah.
and he made it.
Yeah, if you want to read about this, you can just crash right into the bookstore and buy his biography, which is right there. If you want to find out, man, I'll tell you, woo! If that's what's entailed in being perfect master, Mukti is sounding better and better all the time. What a tough road he had.
He
Yeah,
seemed like
did
a
you?
very happy man
Yeah,
in the end.
Well, that was his path.
yeah.
Not everybody is Upasni.
Yeah.
I mean, my God.
It's interesting because a lot of people say to me, or I've heard them say, your path is the path of knowledge because you study all these books. It's absolutely not the path. The path is the renunciation.
Yeah. And renunciation means the absolute repudiation of the false.
It
And,
seems that
in favor of the
renunciation
real.
is
In
in
favor
all
of the
3,
real.
right?
Huh?
It seems that the renunciation is in all 3 of them.
Yes, it is. But in the Tiffin Lectures, Baba's going over these 3 paths. And he really emphasizes all 3 of them. Renunciation is the foundation. Like in Karma Yoga, you can see that. It's renunciation of selfish motive. But here's the difference between the Gyan path and the Karma path. In Karma Yoga, you act, right? For some reason, I must have been a salesman of vacuum cleaners because I use this example. This is my job, is to sell vacuum cleaners, right? And it's a good thing. I mean, clean houses are better than dirty ones, but it's not like that the entire history of the world was waiting for me to come along and sell you a vacuum cleaner. You know, you might say Beethoven's Ninth Symphony might be more inspiring than my vacuum cleaner is, or the Life of St. Francis of Assisi, but it's not bad either. So my job as a vacuum cleaner salesman is I try to sell vacuum cleaners. And I go around to people, and if I'm really a karma yogi, I would probably actually sell a vacuum cleaner that I believe in, I think is a good one. And when I'm trying to sell it, I'm, you know, honest about it and everything like that, and give them a good deal, you know, fair. But I also want to sell it because I have to make money for the company I'm working for and for myself. That's part of karma yoga. So, you know, if I do a really good job and I sell 1,000 vacuum cleaners, you know, I make a good commission and my company is happy with me, et cetera, et cetera. But the essence to karma, I would do all of this as a karma yogi. But in my heart of hearts, I would be detached from whether I was successful or not. So I'm really trying to sell a vacuum cleaner to Mahu. And she listens to me to half an hour and says, "Get out of here, you fool. I already have one and yours is a piece of junk." And she throws a watermelon at me and plasters me with tomatoes as part of the deal. If I'm a karma yogi, I'm unaffected. I mean, I would probably leave the house because tomatoes were coming my way, but I would be inwardly, as opposed to I'm selling, you know, to Elaine who says, "This is such a good vacuum cleaner. I'm going to buy 5 of them, even though I'm only one person, but I like it so much." So I would be equally happy and I would be equally unaffected in both cases. But I would do it, you see. That's what a karma yogi would do. You would do the action. But in Jnana Yoga, you don't do the action because I'm a yogi up in a cave and I'm not selling vacuum cleaners, right? I've removed myself from the sphere of action entirely. So in Jnana Yoga, you don't act. One of the themes I want to bring out is these paths are different from each other. They're not the same. Yeah.
I have a question. When someone really loved the master, like Meherabode,
Yeah.
that moment that he feel that pure love,
Yeah.
automatically create a kind of knowledge without reading.
Right.
Yes? This knowledge that born from pure love,
Yeah.
without reading any books and open
Yeah.
many secrets. Is this kind of knowledge is Jnana Yoga,
Or Bhakti Yoga.
Bhakti? This
Well, you know, the thing is, in their depth, these paths come very close to each other. And they're not radically apart from each other. That is true. Yeah. But I'm talking about superficially to begin with. On the surface of it, they're not the same in that what you do. Like if you're Milarepa, have you heard of Milarepa? The great yogi, perfect master apparently, up in the Tibet. You're up in a cave. Well, you're not doing karma yoga because you haven't got a job. Nobody's seen you for the last 5 years. You're all green in color because you've been eating nettles. That's your food. So, I mean, on the surface, these paths are quite different from each other. In their depth, they come close to each other, which is kind of what you're talking about.
I don't.
Yeah, but and then the path, and here's what Baba says about how you get rid of sanskaras in these paths. That in, okay, let me come here in Bhakti Yoga now. In Bhakti Yoga, in its real sense, you are acting for the sake of the love of the beloved. That might be Leila, but let's make it spiritual. It might be God, or it might be Meherabode if you're a devotee of Meherabode. But the distinctive characteristic of Bhakti Yoga is you're not thinking about the renunciation of the fruit of action, and you're not thinking about the true and the false. You're thinking about, is the beloved pleased? That's your focus. And you forget about these other things. And Baba said this is real bhakti yoga, the real thing. And the way that you get rid of sanskaras in bhakti yoga is you turn your face away from the spiritual path, you turn your face away from the world and entirely toward the beloved, and focus entirely on the beloved. And your sanskaras, you know sanskaras are binders, right? They get washed away without your ever having to think about it. So you could say that all action is karma yoga in a way, but the distinctive characteristic of bhakti yoga is you don't bother about it. You don't, am I making spiritual progress? Am I getting close? Baba renounced everything, including his God state. Baba renounced his godhood and became an ordinary seeker of God. And this went on for 3 years. And it culminated in a phase in the second half of 1951, spilling over into 1952, called Mananash, which is the annihilation of the mind. So this is a whole big story all in itself. But the reason I'm bringing it up is right before he started Mananash, he had a meeting in Hyderabad where he announced Mananash. And he gave a discourse. He hadn't been giving discourses because he had renounced godhood. And so he didn't know anything, right? He wasn't God, so how could he give discourses? But he did, in this case, talk about the great paths. And a theme that I get from this discourse is that he's saying, they're impossible. They're impossible to really do it, you know? And he explains why in karma yoga, you always fall for this trap or for that trap. And what the thought that occurs to me is that Baba, as a seeker of, I think he became an archetypal seeker of God on behalf of all humanity. That's how I interpret that. And as such, he was confronting the spectacle of the paths to God, and they were all clogged up, and no one could use them. They were so difficult, and probably there's so much crap in them, you know, because everything's been crapped up in this age of ours. So what I think is, through Mananash, he annihilated the mind and opened everything up again. That's how I interpret that. Anyway, that's a very interesting discussion of the different marks. But I'm just mentioning some of the places you can read about this, if you want to.
This discourse that you say Baba talks about Mananash, where is it?
Phyllis Frederick included it in The Path of Love. I forget the title.
Okay,
it's in the middle of it somewhere.
Sure.
We need to republish it, going back to the original sources, but you know, it's from the Mananash period. Anyway, in the case of karma yoga, and Baba talks about how you eliminate sanskaras in the 3 yogas, and it's done differently. Baba said, as I was just saying, in bhakti yoga, the bhakti marg. Okay, let me read about this. Devotion to this is bhakti, the path of devotion, bhakti yoga, which in its higher reaches merges into pure love for God, impels the aspirant to forget the world and find happiness only in the beloved's pleasure, right? This is rooted on God's nature as bliss, but because it is a yoga, it's not, I don't focus on my bliss, I focus on the happiness of the beloved. That's why it's rooted in bliss. Rooted in God's nature as infinite bliss, the path of devotion begins in human love, but in its culmination, it touches upon that love, which is the goal of all striving and which encompasses all the plants. I actually think love is in all of these 3 paths myself. I don't think it's the monopoly of any one path. But in Bhakti Yoga, you get rid of sanskaras by not bothering about them at all. You don't even think about them. You just focus on what would make the beloved happy. And through the course of your doing that, they get washed away on their own without your ever attending to the matter. In Karma Yoga, Baba gave this analogy. Let's take, there's a theatrical company. And it puts on plays. Here, maybe I can quickly find where he gives this here. No, this isn't it. Anyway, I'm not going to take the time to try to find this, although it might be right. Yeah, here it is. Okay, a theatrical company, and they put on plays. And there's an actor, A. This is a regular person, and he's given the role of a king in a play, right? We're all the hero of our own stories, right? So it's all about me. Me. So is a king in a play, and as an actor, when he has great victories as a king, he exults in it. What's the term? A methods actor, where you try to identify with your role. But when he has defeats, he feels humiliated and crushed. So he really identifies with his role and exults in happiness and is miserable in misery. And because he played his role so well, the owner of the theatrical company, when the play is over, gives him a role in the next play. Sounds good, right? Well, here's how Baba interprets it. The theatrical company equals the subtle and gross universe. The owner of the company is sanskaras. Who gave you a new role? Your sanskaras did.
He's the boss.
Because your sanskaras say, Sonia, you are so good. Let's do another one. So you get reborn. And this is how we keep getting reborn time after time. The actor is a human mind. The part which the actor plays grows in subtle form, and the play is a lifetime. Acting means the mind taking subtle and gross experience of fine impressions through the subtle and gross body. In other words, when I'm acting the part, my sanskaras are coming up and I'm taking the enjoyment of them by living them out and taking the upabhog. And feelings of happiness and sorrow, etc., experiences affecting the mind. So this is Baba's analogy, right, of the typical way of living, of spending sanskaras. And this person gets a new role from the owner of the company, that is his sanskaras say, good job, boy, I'm giving you another lifetime. This goes on through millions of lifetimes. This is the normal process. But then there is actor B, Baba says. Now, actor B plays the role. He's King Lear in Shakespeare's play, or Viola in Twelfth Night, or whatever the role may be. But in the course of playing the role, B knows that he's not the king, even though he acts it. So when the king has a great victory, he plays the role of being delighted by it, but he knows he's not the king, and in his heart of hearts, he takes no pleasure from it. And then the king suffers a terrible defeat, and he plays the role of being devastated and distraught. But in his heart of hearts, he knows he's not the king and is not affected at all. Okay, this is a karma yogi, right? You play the role, but you're detached. In this case, the owner of the theatrical company is most dissatisfied with his performance and fires him.
He becomes Sadguru.
That's right, the sanskaras say, you don't belong in my theatrical company, because you don't have any more sanskaras.
That's right.
So that's the analogy that Baba gave for that, of the karma yoga. So you see, in karma yoga, you play out the role, you perform the action, you do it, but inward in your heart of hearts where no one else can see but you know it, you don't take the enjoyment of it, and you don't take the fruit of action. You see, it's different from Bhakti Yoga in this sense. In Bhakti Yoga, you're not thinking about any of this. You're just focusing on the pleasure of the beloved. That's all you see. But in Karma Yoga, you are conscious of playing the role, and you're conscious that I am not this. In Bhakti Yoga, you're not thinking, I am not this. You're just thinking about pleasing the beloved. You see how they're actually a bit different from each other. Now, in Jnana Yoga, the whole process, it's a very strange discussion, but it's a very deep one that Baba gives here. This is infinite intelligence. Here's what you do. Okay, so this would be like, again, a yogi in a cave. It's probably, since I spoke last, in LA it's gone up to $2,500 a month. And it'll probably be $3,000 by next week. But you found one in the Himalayas and you're in a meditational state. Okay. Before this, an ordinary person has got what Baba calls sulat sanskaras. I wrote the word there. Sulat sanskaras are ordinary. You know what a sanskara is, right? It's an impression that you got from previous actions. When you perform an action, you get an impression, and the impression is made on your mind, and it stays there for, as long as it takes for it to come up again. So a sulat is an ordinary sanskara. In the ordinary progress of things, a sulat sanskara comes up, and you spend it. And by spending it, it's gone. It's annihilated. The catch is that you take the enjoyment of it, the upabhag. And that can mean suffering also. Like I could, successfully make $100,000 this month. So I take the joy having earned this money. Or else, David gets pissed at something I say and he punches me in the nose and I get a bloody nose. That's upabhag also. So it's enjoyment or suffering. It's both of those. But he punches me in the nose and oh God, that hurts like anything. Why did you do that? Okay, I'm taking the upabhag and thus I'm acquiring. I was spending sanskaras in doing it because last time I punched him in the nose, right? So I'm actually getting, spending the sanskaras I acquired, but because I'm in taking the upabhag, I'm getting new ones, right? It's taking the upabhag, taking the enjoyment or suffering is what gets you new sanskaras. So I get new sanskaras, and when I die, I've got all these new sanskaras, and I have another lifetime. And Baba gave this analogy for it. It's kind of a shocking analogy, and I always say this is one intended to win the hearts of mothers everywhere, this analogy. Baba gave, when you hear the whole thing, it's like a mother feeding her baby milk. And the baby feeds on milk, grows up and is healthy and is a healthy person. Well, what is this? This is taking, spending your sulat sanskaras and getting new one. You're feeding the baby of your next lifetime. That's what that is. You're creating, the baby means new lifetimes for yourself. That's the normal progress of human experience. But in Jnana Yoga, you do something very different. When the sanskara arises in your mind, you refuse to countenance it. You refuse to give it space. You might metaphorically say you chop off its head. You don't give it any accommodation at all. Well, you might say, you haven't spent the sanskara, right? But in the process of not spending the sanskara, the sulat sanskara, you create a reverse sanskara. You create the sanskara of not spending the sanskara, right? Because that's an experience too. And that's what Baba calls an ulat sanskara. And the ulat sanskara kills the sulat sanskara. In other words, the sanskara you have created by not spending the sanskara kills the sanskara. The negative action kills the positive. You get the idea? And then Baba asks the question, okay, your sulat sanskara has been killed off, but what about the ulat sanskara? Why aren't you see the negative sanskara? Why are you not bound by this? And here's what Baba says. The sulat sanskara had content relating to the enjoyment of the world. Like David punched me in the nose, I got a bloody nose. But I actually renounced, whatever the thought is, I renounced the thought entirely. I created an ulat sanskara that killed the sulat sanskara. But the ulat sanskara has no content. It's negative, it's empty. It's an empty shell. So I'm not bound by it and I get God realized. I don't know if you follow this. Huh?
I should punch you in the nose more often.
You should do it more often. I'll get to God in no time. Yeah. Yeah. So you get the idea. So this is a different process. You're actually directly focusing on these sanskaras as they manifest to you, and you're refusing to give them space. And by refusing, you're creating another kind of sanskara that kills them. And this is the delightful metaphor that Baba gave for this, to win the hearts of mothers everywhere. He said, instead of feeding your baby milk, you feed your baby poison so that it dies. This is talks were given to a bunch of men, right? So, but actually, you get the idea? Who is this baby? It's my next lifetime. So I'm actively poisoning my next lifetime. I'm killing it so that I don't live it out. So you see, these are the methods of eliminating sanskaras by means of the three yogas, and the methods are different, actually. They're not the same at all. And in one of his Tiffin Lectures, Baba goes into this. He says, like in Karma Yoga, you act, but in Jnana Yoga, you don't act. Well, you can't do both of these at once. You know, the paths are different from each other. So if you're on your own, just to kind of do all three is really not possible. You know, the paths really are quite different from each other. But Baba said, if you have a master, he can integrate them. The master knows how to integrate them. And Baba gave this example that some of you have been you've been bringing up points relating to this. Baba said, for example, you know, this is in Meherabad. He was talking to his Mandali. He said, for example, I'm giving you these talks right now, these Tiffin Lectures. Well, this is Jnana Yoga. You're getting knowledge, you're getting understanding, right? You're focusing on what I'm saying and not letting any other thoughts distract you. Jnana Yoga. When I ask you to do something, you do it. Karma Yoga. You're performing action for my sake. And why do you do it? Because you love me. Bhakti Yoga. And thus, when you follow a master, he can integrate all three paths. But on your own, it's not so easy, because the paths are different from each other. So this is some of what Baba said about this. So anyway, what do you think? Any feedback?
Very interesting.
Yeah. And you know, I always bring up the question within our Baba world. I do think, because Meherabode was the avatar of the age, he really came for everybody, and we're going to have all kinds of people in the course of time. So there's really no rule or formula that's going to cover every case. I mean, you look at some of these musts, you know, when they come back, holy smokes, what they're good. I remember there's one must, I forget his name, but he used to, we had this delicious lunch. Well, here's what he had for lunch, all his meals. He had an assistant who would pound rock to powder and pound up blocks of wood to fibers, mix them with water, and then he would eat it. That's what he ate, you know. When you get characters like this coming back, they're going to be every kind of thing, you know.
Yeah. That's
So-
the Gyan Yoga probably.
Yeah. So there's really, I don't think we haven't really been hit with that yet, but it will happen because of the avatar. So I don't think it's good to come up with any rule for Baba lovers. But I do think that Baba with his lovers did, in the main part, for the mainstream, create a kind of a style, it seems to me, generally, with a lot of scope for individual variation. And I actually think it has all three, to tell the truth. It probably has more bhakti than the others. And the bhakti aspect of the path to Baba would be things like remembering him all the time and taking his name and trying to create love for him. Also, not worrying about the spiritual path. I think that's an emphasis that he gave. And that's a very bhakti thing. In bhakti, you just focus on the beloved and you don't worry about your spiritual progress or anything like that. That seems to be characteristically bhakti. So there's probably more bhakti than anything else on the whole. But I think there's a lot of karma yoga too, right? If you've got any kind of a job, a paying job or a job, say, within the LA Center, you know, if you don't do it with detachment, you're going to learn how to do it with detachment. Baba groups have excellent spiritual trainers who are called other Baba lovers.
Truer words.
And if you get attached to what you do, your spiritual trainers, the other Baba lovers, are going to detach you. But I'm joking, but I think it is true. You have to do karma yoga. And if you've got a job and you're trying to be a spiritual aspirant, I mean a real job in the world, what other alternative is there? You have to do your job, but if you're trying to be a spiritual aspirant, you renounce the fruit of action. There's no choice. I mean, that's the route that's there. And as to Gyan Yoga, it seems to me that sometimes in our Baba world, people will disparage intellectual knowledge. And Baba did say you cannot find God through the intellect. God is way beyond the understanding. And that is certainly true. I do think it's true nonetheless that Baba lovers understand a lot. Baba has given a lot of understanding to his lovers, you know. We have the understanding about obeying a master. That certainly isn't popular in our culture nowadays. We have an understanding about the law of karma and reincarnation. Many, many topics, actually, Baba lovers have been given to understand a lot. I think that's a significant portion of the path that Baba gave to his lovers. So it seems to me he's got a kind of a characteristic blend of all three. And overwhelmingly, Baba said, the most important thing is love. And to my mind, love is actually relevant to all of these paths. That's what it seems to me. But anyway, what do you think? Do you have an opinion about karma, bhakti, and Gyan as a Baba lover?
I can see how they converge around love.
Yeah.
So like we start out, they're like three doors.
Yeah.
Door number one, number two, number three.
Yeah.
But they all lead to the path of love.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Like you said, Baba would integrate them, even if it's there in one's karma or, path. So we don't really think about it.
Yeah, I know. I don't think we're actually in the phase with Baba where we haven't thought about these things at all.
Yeah.
And that's been part of the gift and blessing. They said someone in the 11th century, Muhammad lived in the 7th century, died in the 7th century. But somebody said, right after Muhammad, there was Sufism without the name. They didn't have the word Sufism, but they had the Sufism. Now, we have the name, but we don't have the Sufism. And we're kind of in that phase right now where nobody has bothered about these things because we've been in the afterglow of Baba himself, and the path has been so easy and nobody has worried about it. But as time passes, it is inevitable and natural for people to start to think about these things more and more. It may not be, some of you are a little bit younger, but, I look at some of us, Lois and Rosie, and Charlie and Sandra and Boo and, of our generation. I can see the next generation coming along and saying, you old farts, what the heck do you do for Baba? You just sit there on your tushes and don't do a darn thing. Now, it may not be completely fair because we do a little bit.
I think they're already saying that.
Yeah,
They're
but I could kind of understand the perspective. Baba has given all these things we can do, and it really hasn't been the role of our generation to worry about that yet. But I do think people will come along and say, you want to talk about the new life? Well, where's your caravan? Why haven't you built a caravan and started off across the Midwest? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And you'll have people who will do it, So I think we're coming into a time where these issues will start to occur to people. It's natural after the avatar, So that's why I'm talking about it now, because I think people will think about these things more and more in the years ahead. Okay, well, there's a bit on the 3 yogas. Any comments you want to make or thoughts? I do want to say this a little more about, actually the yogas are not so completely separate from each other. And if you read some of Baba's discourses on meditation where he goes over this, he does spell this out a bit. But an interesting case is the discourse on selfless service, right? And selfless service was Baba's English expression for karma yoga. It means exactly the same thing. And it's a really, really wonderful discourse. So you want to read about karma yoga, that discourse is a great place to go. But an interesting thing about it is the first 2 pages of that discourse, Baba is saying, if you really want to serve other people, you need to cultivate an understanding of what really helps them. Because a lot of times people do things to help other people and it only makes it worse. Look at the world today and you see examples everywhere, right? But you need to actually understand what really and truly helps them. And so he kind of spends about 2 pages on that topic. But then at the end of that he says, all of this is just, good guidance on how to try to serve others. But this shouldn't paralyze you. You shouldn't be so frightened that your service is going to hurt them that you don't do anything at all. If you act out of a generous impulse to help other people, it will wind up helping them, even if it wasn't the best thing in the world. Okay, so Baba says, go ahead and try selfless service, even if you're not sure of yourself. Yeah?
Yeah, so that's the spiritual understanding.
Yeah, spiritual understanding, right. So the point I'm making is that actually the discourse on selfless service begins with 2 pages on Dhyan Yoga. the cultivation of spiritual understanding as something which should inform selfless service. To really do selfless service, you need some knowledge, right? And actually, what would be the real motivation for selfless service? Love. You know? Okay, the worldly form of it, you do it for the sake of duty. But if it's real selfless service, it's inspired by love. And thus you have bhakti. So really speaking, these paths are not so separate from each other, even though in their surface appearance they may seem to be. Okay, as a last topic, what are we at?
3:15.
Yeah. Is it
13.
Yeah, that says 3:10. Which clock should I believe?
3:10. My cell phone.
What does it say?
3:10.
3:10, yeah.
So that's accurate.
Yeah. Well, this clock being farther west than that clock is in a different time zone. Okay. Okay, a little bit about the planes and the paths. Let's see. Much of this, some of you might be very familiar with this, perhaps others not. But here is the picture of the path that Baba gave in God Speaks, one of his charts here. So, okay, so it begins here in the gross world, and this includes universes, visible and invisible. And notice that Baba says universes with an S, and he meant it. In Meherabode, we'll spend time on this, but Baba made it clear from as early as the 1920s that there are innumerable universes. It's only in very recent times that astrophysicists have started to speculate on this. But Baba said it from the very beginning. Visible and invisible, there are invisible universes too. Okay, and imbibing energy from subtle world through gross aspects of energy, such as nuclear, solar, etc. So the gross world gets energy, but it's indirect and it's imbibed from the subtle world. We don't have the direct manifestation of prana here in the gross world. But then when you get into the subtle world, you are in the domain of energy. And this starts with the first plane, and this is the threshold between the gross world and the subtle. By the way, Baba did then later say that there's an astral sheath between the subtle and the gross.
Yeah.
But the word astral, as we saw it earlier, was used just to mean subtle. Baba changed his definition of the word between the 20s and later on. Okay, and the fourth plane is the threshold between the subtle world and the mental. Are you guys all acquainted with this? Many of you would be.
And also on that astral sheet, Baba says as soon as you enter the subtle plane, that is vanished. No more astral sheet.
Yeah, the astral disappears.
It's gone.
Yeah,
Disappeared.
yeah. You leave it behind. And this is the subtle world. The domain, remember, gross world, subtle world, mental world. And beyond this is the world of the mind, the mental world, domain of mind. And it has two planes. Okay, so the first four planes, Baba says when you're on the border of the first plane, he says, you see very strange things with your with gross nose, eyes, ears, experience the subtle smell, sights, and music. With your gross eyes, you see subtle sights. There actually are inner senses, Baba says. There's a subtle sight, subtle hearing, and so forth. But you start to see light globes and other things like this when you're just about to enter the path. I've never had the experience myself, but Baba describes it. So on the first plane, you start to when you get fully into the first plane, the gross world disappears from your experience. You no longer experience it. It's gone for you. And when you get up to the subtle second plane, you get more and more experience of energy. By the way, this book, Early Messages to the West, I mentioned yesterday. The fifth section of it is Baba's notes for a film to be made in Hollywood. And it gives a scenario of 3 souls going through 5 different lifetimes. In the last 2, one of them starts to go on the planes, and Baba gives a kind of a visualized description of what the planes are like. It's different than you'll find in God Speaks and Discourses. It's imagistic. So if you want a more vivid impression of it, it is to be found there.
What section in that book again?
There are 5 sections of primary text, and this is the 5th. It's called How It All Happened.
Okay.
And there are 5 lifetimes. In the last 2, you'll find this. Baba talks about, going through masses of shattered light. I don't know what the heck is masses of shattered light, but that's how he describes it, like that. And he doesn't use the words, but he also describes fana and baka. In fact, I'm going to put those words up here because they are quite relevant to the spiritual path. Some of the books we're working on right now are going to explain this much better than you'll find in any of these other books. So what happens when you're going up the spiritual path, Bob says, is let's suppose you're going from the first plane to the second plane. You pass through an experience of an annihilation. The annihilation of what you were experiencing before. And this is actually a very big deal, because as when you're ascending up the planes, you're ascending from the less real to the more real, right? The gross is less real than the subtle is. So what gets annihilated is annihilated forever. You're leaving it behind. Disappears. So I think it's probably a pretty frightening experience.
Do people have disabling kind of psychotic experiences and things like that?
I don't know if I'd call it psychotic, but I think it's stunning.
Unusual.
They're often quite stunned and sort of immobilized in the state of fana, between planes.
How long does it take,
I don't know. Baba never really said. One of the problems is that time on the subtle world is completely different than time in the gross world. And time in the mental world is completely different than time in the subtle world. And Baba didn't explain different how. Does it go faster or slower? Didn't say. So it's kind of hard, they don't correlate very easily. But when you're passing from one plane to another, you go through a state of where the annihilation of everything that where you were happens. Like if you have who was it, Ralph Brown in Kebby had a house with all these treasured collections of things, right? Well, that's kind of what we are, right? We've got all these treasured samskaras, which we don't want anyone to get away with, right? So you pass through an experience where a whole shitload of it gets annihilated, it'd be pretty upsetting. So I think these are it's very hard to imagine. I mean, like somebody dying or a house burning down or something like that is small potatoes compared to this. So fana is quite a big deal. But once you've passed through it, gradually you enter into the next plane and start to abide and dwell there. And that is called baka, abiding. These are Sufi terms. And you can read about them in God Speaks, and in the supplement, there's a whole section on fana and baka. So you progress up through the planes, and Baba said in Creation and Its Causes, this new book, that if you're traveling without a master, at death, you fall back to gross consciousness again. In your next lifetime, you have to do it over. I would imagine, as a metaphor, it's like, okay, you're trying to climb Mount Whitney, right? Not too far from here. And you get up to, let's say there are no roads, there are no paths. Or 300 years ago, and you somehow struggle up to 7,000 feet, and then you die, and by God, you find yourself back in LA again. And you've got to do it all over. I'm sure but Baba did say that in your next lifetime, you do get an opportunity to enter into the spiritual path and do it over again. And I would imagine if you did it in your last lifetime, in your next lifetime, you're kind of good at it. You've got a knack for it. So you can get back to where you were and progress a little higher. This is true up to the third plane. Baba said if you're traveling with a master, that doesn't happen. When you die, you resume from where you were. So that's one of the advantages to having a real spiritual master,
Is it third plane or fourth?
Up to the third. And you're starting to acquire powers in these earlier planes too, right? They're occult powers at this stage. But the fourth plane is something quite different. This is at the juncture between the subtle world and the mental world. And Baba said that in the fourth plane, you get the full blast of desires from the mental sphere. The thoughts and feelings and desires hit you with full force. I mean, you guys have probably all, what desire is like. I gotta have it, right? Well, in the fourth plane, it's incomparably more forceful. But if you, and you also have the powers of God, actually. You have those available to you. You can actually do anything. You can raise the dead, you can create worlds, you could really do anything. But if you do it, you suffer a cataclysmic fall. Baba said, what happens, this is in the Tiffin Lectures, Baba said, because of the force of your meditation or your spiritual progress, the tremendous mass of, remember, we've gone all the way from stone state. Man, we've got sanskaras, right? There's no measuring how much sanskaras we've got. Apart from human form, there's all the pre-human stuff, and that's with us. It all gets kind of like lifted up and suspended, so to speak. But if you misuse your powers, what happens? It crashes down on you, and you're completely crushed under its weight. And you are destroyed. Baba said, you're crushed all the way back to stone form consciousness. All the way back. So you die, and you begin again as a stone. So this is the one real spiritual disaster that can happen. There are other problems you can encounter on the path, but this is the disaster. And Baba warned against it time after time after time.
But in some places I read more than one place that Baba said, usually he sends his perfect masters or one of the agents to help them pass through. They
Yeah.
don't, they prevent it from happening, just to help the humanity.
Yeah, it's sort of, in the Tiffin Lectures, one place, Baba does kind of say you kind of need a master to get through it. Baba called it St. John of the Cross wrote this great poem called The Dark Night of the Soul, and he calls it the Dark Night of the Soul. It's a terrible and dangerous path. Baba did say once that if you're about to misuse your powers, if the master, the perfect master in charge of the situation is of the Jalali type, you know Jalali?
Yeah.
You have in Arabic Jalali and Jamali. Jalali is fiery and majestic and wrathful. That if the master has that attribute, he knocks you back to stone state. But if the master in charge of the situation is of the Jamali type, and Jamali is loving and gentle and merciful, he snatches away your powers so that you don't abuse them. So I hope you've got a Jamali. If you're about to misuse your powers, sort of say, can I put in a request for a Jamali master?
Upasni Maharaj.
I pay double.
Upasni would be Jalali. You'd be Jalali. If you're about to misuse your powers, don't go for Upasni Maharaj. Go in for Narayan Maharaj. You'd snatch away your powers. So then, if you get through this, this is Baba in Creationist Causes gave an analogy for this. He said, he gave two analogies. One of them is rather odd. He said, it's like the spiritual path goes around a sharp curve in the fourth plane. Isn't that funny? I don't know what that means. Has anyone been there?
Can you repeat, please?
On the fourth plane, the spiritual path goes around a sharp curve. I don't know what that means. But then Baba said, if you're driving a car very, very, very fast, and suddenly you hit a curve, what happens? You flip off the cliff. And that's another analogy for the fourth plane. You fall off the cliff like that. And Baba also gave this analogy, and it's a curious one. He said, let's suppose you've got a man, a beggar, with 45 children. That's a lot. I don't know, in our Baba world, the Nordines are kind of way up there. I think there are 11 of them. Well, that's nothing compared to 45. So he's got 45 children, and he's really worried about how to feed them. If he could just get 10 rupees, back in those days, 10 rupees was a significant amount, it'd be enough to feed them for at least one day, right? Let's suppose all of a sudden he comes upon a huge mountain-sized heap of precious coins, gold coins, silver coins, rupees. Is he gonna take it? Of course he will. He won't be able to resist. He's so worried about feeding his kids. This is an analogy for the fourth plane. It's kind of funny because it sounds like it's a selfless thing to do to feed his kids, right? But Baba, maybe when you're on the fourth plane, you've got all these followers you've got to satisfy or something, like that. You've got all these people you've got to please. And when you suddenly see this mountain of treasure, you just can't resist it. So the fourth plane is really dangerous, Baba said.
I think that's a significant analogy the more I think of it.
Yeah.
Because, if you're on the fourth plane, you have the power to do anything.
Yeah.
And you see people suffering, you're going to want to help them.
Yeah, and God speaks, Baba did say on the fourth plane, using your powers for the material upliftment of anyone is bad use of it. And Baba said, like in the world, for example, the material benefit of someone would be like creating hospitals or charitable services and so forth. But on the fourth plane, to use your powers for that is bad use.
Yeah.
Even though it might seem like it's a good thing. But the good use Baba gave, and we're going to have to end, it's about 3:30, but the good use that Baba gave would be, let's suppose there's a true spiritual seeker in the desert searching for God who's about to die of thirst. You could manifest, because in the fourth plane you can do this, an Abdal can do it. You can manifest before that pilgrim, give him enough water so as not to die of thirst, and then disappear. Baba gave that as an example of good use. And if you refrain from using your powers at all, which is really hard to do on the fourth plane, you wind up going to the fifth plane. And if you use them well, Baba said, you can go directly to the sixth plane. Anyway, this is the great danger point on this. But then, once you're on the fifth plane, you're safe. You're safe from a fall. But anyway, this woman I know had a dream about this, and it left me with the impression that the fifth plane is like a vast wilderness, and you feel like you can't. God is nowhere to be found. I bet it is like that. The fifth plane is the world of thoughts, but we have no idea who these people are. Someone on the fifth plane is like a great monarch. It's like a great king. We don't know that, but that's really, these are giants, But on the fifth plane, you experience thoughts, but the veil between you and God is still there. It's not been lifted yet. There's a lot more to say about all of this. We could spend 3 whole sessions about the path, the sevenfold veil and everything else. But when you enter in the sixth plane, the veil lifts and you see God face to face. You have the direct sight of God, like Moses seeing the promised land or whatever it might be. But you experience yourself as separate from God still. And this is where real love happens. You experience the agony of being separate from God. But at the same time, the gap between you and God is uncrossable. It's unimaginable.
It calls it a chasm.
It's a chasm. Yeah.
He's there, like you feel like he's within reach, but he's so far.
One of the musts, when they were trying to get him, he was a six-plane must. And whoever the Mandali was, the guy said to him about Baba, even though the Mandali didn't tell him who he wanted to take him to, the must knew. So the must said, he wants to take me to the great homeland, but I don't want to go there. Because you're terrified, you're going to lose yourself. There's another must, Lakansha, I think it was, and Kakabarya was supposed to watch out for him. And in the middle of the night, Kakabarya woke up and the must had gotten up and was going out of the building. And Kaka followed him, and the must was irritated. And he went to the bathroom and came back and said, "You're very thorough, Kaka." And what Kaka inferred from that is he wanted to take off head for the hills, because Baba was going to annihilate him by giving him God realization. So you're in that terrible, terrible dilemma in the sixth plane. But in the end, Baba said, you can get as far as the sixth plane on your own, although it's really, really hard. But between the sixth plane and the seventh, you can't do that on your own. You have to have the grace of a master, a perfect master, or actually a Jivan Mukta can give realization to one, or the avatar can give realization to any number. Yeah, Elaine?
Have you heard that Muhammad was taken from the 3.5 to the 5th plane.
Yeah.
So he had no experience of the 4th?
He was caught between the 3rd and the 4th.
Oh.
So I presume he jumped over the 4th, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think he probably was caught in, there's a state of enchantment on the 3rd plane. It's called a hiatus. And when you get caught in that hiatus, whatever physical posture you're in, you freeze. Like if I'm like this, I'll stay in this position for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I won't move. So I think he was in the hiatus. And Baba wound up lifting him up to the 5th plane, actually.
Also, have you heard anything about St. John of the Cross? He was with Teresa, right?
Yeah.
So you think that he was protected and veiled from the 4th? Although he experienced the 4th.
I
In the
don't
dark night of the soul.
know where Baba said anything about it. It said that he was on the 4th plane. I don't know, could have been. I haven't seen where Baba talked about it one way or another. You know. Baba did say that Pythagoras was on the 4th plane.
Oh, he did?
He did.
What
Yeah.
was that?
So when you do the Pythagorean, be careful of using the Pythagorean theorem. You might be meddling with 4th plane powers.
That's right.
Okay, we better close it. So in about 10 minutes, we'll have a little bit of music for anyone who would like. And that's, as you can see, we've had 4 sessions, and thank you very much for having the interest to review some of this material. But as I imagine you can see, we could spend much, much more on all of this. There's much more to be said. But this is a little bit. Okay, Jai Baba, everybody.